Welcome, folks. Welcome to Scrumban, what it is and when to use it. My name is Ajay, and I have been doing Scrum since 2005, and I was a certified Scrum Master since 2005, and in and through my consulting experience, I've helped many Scrum teams since that time. And as I was helping various Scrum teams in various capacities, I came across similar patterns that I was working with. Common issues, common problems in Scrum teams. But it added tremendous value in the organizations I was working with. And as I was growing in my career, in 2010, a client of mine came up with a brilliant idea. And he said, hey, let's build a Scrum application. Scrum was born in 2010. And what that gave me was an exposure to vast amounts of data, various teams and organizations across the world. Scrum is in 145 countries and has 65,000 users plus. And what it gave me was basically an exposure to a lot of data, a lot of patterns. And I was seeing that my experience was actually shared by many people around the world. And as I was exposed to the Kanban method, and I learned a lot from David in his book, I saw tools in the Kanban method that could add tremendous value. I became an LKU accredited Kanban trainer around that time, and in and through that experience, I trained and coached a lot of teams in the Kanban method. And I started applying the Kanban method in various teams. And a lot of those experiences are documented in this book, The Scrumban Revolution. It's just newly come out. It's published, it's coming out in July. I'm very thankful to David Anderson and Jim Benson for writing forewords to it. And thankful to Alistair as well for accepting it into a series. But this is basically the story of various case studies that we've been exposed to, and how Kanban method was applicable in those contexts. Out of these experiences also, I wrote this game called the Get Scrumban game. It's an online game that basically helps teams and individuals learn Kanban principles in a Scrum context, how to apply them in a Scrum context. It's based off Russ Healy's Get Kanban game, and it's for Scrum teams. So I encourage you to check that out. So some of the clients we help around the New England area primarily, and now in Europe as well. Show you what was a spoof video of what could be Agile project managers talking about Scrum stuff. Or, I don't know if you saw this, but all right.
¿Y cuál es el trabajo más duro que has hecho?
Y me llama el cocinero. Risita, ¿qué? Ve por la paellera. Venga, que las 2 de la tarde ya están aquí. Miren, bañador, en las chanclas. Todo despeinado porque no me dio tiempo nada ponerme las chanclas y el bañador. Voy a la playa, había subido la marea. ¿Y tú? ¿Tú? Había subido la marea y encontré una paella. Y la encontré porque estaba la paellera agarrada metida entre las piedras de Chipiona, del faro. Y cuando entro en el restaurante me ve el cocinero con una paellera y a ver la vez de paellera. ¡Asómate! ¡Mira dónde llega el agua! Llegaba el agua hasta el restaurante. Había subido la marea. ¡Ay! y yo con el bañador y con la paella. El cocinero. No vea, a Sevilla. Y al último, que cuando ya salió la bien de regla, estamos llorando los dos. Me cobró el tío la paella. Me cobró a 500 metros la paella. Y ya no fui más. Me fui andando a coger los amarillos hasta hoy. Me mandó por la noche, había bajado más el agua y por la mañana había subido. Cualquiera estaba bonita la paellera, ¿sabes? A lo mejor está en el barco ese del petróleo.
En el Prestige.
En el Petriense. Pues no cobré nada, me dieron el dinero del bote.
So, so I've watched that so many times, I still get a kick out of it. All kidding aside, this is an actual graph of one of our clients who hired an Agile transformation consulting company. And they did assessments and they showed these progress of Agile maturity. And the problem was that, so apparently this team over here is considered, very highly agile, being agile with other teams and very mature. And I actually happened to interview this team and its customers, and you get a very, very different story. Whether it's real business improvements, or whether it's throughput, or whether it's behavioral changes, none of them were actually seen in those things, in those teams. But yet, that sort of thing was being sold to them, to the client. And the thing about that is that you'll see a lot of this sort of shown, success of framework shown in things like this. This is I'm sure many of you might have seen this. This is version 1's graph in showing how popular frameworks are. And apparently, according to this, Scrum is the most popular framework. And what's stunning to me is year over year, Scrumban is shown as higher than or more polling better than Kanban. Now, whether they're doing true Kanban or not, that's for the people, we don't know. But Scrumban has brand value, if nothing else. Scrumban is, and I'll give you some data. When I did talks on Scrumban at Agile New England, which is the largest Agile user group in New England, Agile Boston, at Agile Maine, when they're a New York City Scrum, Boston Spin, consistently, when I gave a talk on Scrumban, the average attendance was much higher than the median for those groups. So Scrumban, even from a perspective standpoint, right, it has brand value. It opens up doors in the Scrum community to explore new ways of thinking. Mike Cohn, when I was writing the book, Mike Cohn actually, in a CSM class, recommended the Scrumban book to a CSM class, to one of his attendees. Now, that sort of thing is to me, very satisfying, because there is an openness, there is a hunger, there is a willingness in the Scrum community to explore new ways of doing things, new ways of thinking. And that's exciting to see. And why is that? Well, there is a reason. There are problems that people are encountering. Even as I explained, my own experience showed that, and data in Scrum Do clearly displays that. And Ken Schwaber owns it. Ken Schwaber is the co-creator of Scrum, and he says 75% of organizations using Scrum will not get the benefits they hope for from it. So there is a market out there. And there is a need out there. And so as consultants, as people who are interested in the Kanban method, I encourage you to explore Scrumban as a mechanism to help influence that community. Here are some consistent problem areas we see. And just a couple of them, cargo cult implementations where they're focused on the mechanics of Scrum, right? They're focused on the practices. Trust issues, basic trust issues. And really, a lot of these problems are not related to any particular framework. I'll let you guys read this for a couple of seconds here, a few seconds, and then I'll make a point about it. The point is that it has nothing to do with any framework, the problems that people see. Largely, people in organizations don't know why they're doing, for whom they're doing, and what is the value they provide. There is a fundamental lack of vision. It's not to do with the framework, it's to do with a vision of where they're going and why they're doing what they're doing. And this anecdote from Alice in Wonderland talks about direction being important, right? So that being said, if you have a clear, even if you have a vague idea, even a confusion about why you're doing what you're doing, a framework like Scrumban can help you articulate it, define what it is, and then go in that direction. So in today's community, when you ask people what Scrumban is, and these are results from polls we've done, they have various perspectives. It's Agile with Scrum without the time box, or Scrum inside Kanban, and Kanban inside Scrum. And so you get dime a dozen definitions of it. And I go back to Corey's original definition, Corey Lattice's original book from 2008. And what he was trying to demonstrate there is the value of pull systems and continuous flow being applied in Kanban. So for those of you who don't know what pull systems are, it's just the idea that the limits inside of a Kanban board will help balance the demand and capacity for a team, right? And enabling that pull, right? So that's an idea of a pull system, and that's what Corey did a really, really good job describing in his book. That's 2008, and the industry has evolved. There's lots of things that have happened in the industry. And what I see as the fundamental lack in all the data that we see is there is a lack of values. There's a lack of true values and true ownership of that shared ownership and that Kaizen-like approach in Scrum. And when we see good implementations of Scrum, it's usually because people own those values. And one of those things that we see in cargo cult implementation is when they're practice-focused and these values have no place in them. And on the Kanban, every framework has values. Scrum has values, Kanban has values. And what we see as the most important thing is if I had to choose one value, it's the value of this trust, right? And you could even thread these different values with that one value. So when there is a lack of trust or no trust, that's when you see aberrations or poor implementations of a framework, and you have issues. And the one value that keeps getting abused over and over again is that word commitment in Scrum, right? And how has it been used in the past? It's been used to basically as a control mechanism to drive fear and make people work over, right? When you have a sprint commitment, it can't be broken, and it's used as a mechanism when there's lack of trust in forcing velocity, right? So that's a poor implementation. So now that doesn't mean, of course, that in Kanban that cannot happen, right? In Kanban, let's take fixed state policy, for example. right? You can use that, and if you don't have a trust in your team, it can go wrong there too. So it really starts with these values to a lot of, in a large extent. So, and Kanban is better suited to help engender these values in teams. Why? Because transparency is such a big thing in Kanban teams, right? The visual board helps engender that trust. So that's an important aspect. And me, your humble correspondent, in writing this book, I inserted a couple of additional values as suggestions to the community. And one of them is being humility. Because I really think that when people are seeing issues, they have a tendency to hold on to their chosen framework, whatever that is, and fight for it, and not calling out problems when they see them. So, and it doesn't happen all the time, of course, but we do see issues of that. So humility is I suggest as an important value. So then what is Scrumban? Scrumban is the application of the Kanban method in a Scrum context. So we see three specific flavors of it. First is the amplification of Scrum. In other words, you have a Scrum context, you have a starting Scrum context, you've been working through that, and you encounter issues, patterns, or problems. And then you can apply the tools in the Kanban method, its agendas, its principles, its practices, its values, and the ancillary knowledge out there to help improve it when you encounter these problems, these patterns. And so Amplify Scrum is this first bucket, this first flavor. The second one is Adopt Scrum. What I mean by that, it is what I call, for lack of a better phrase, directed evolution. So you have no framework, you have no process, you don't have Scrum, and you're trying to implement Scrum. Kanban as a change method can help you. Yesterday, one of the lightning talks alluded to this. You can use the Kanban as a change method to help evolve the team to implement Scrum ideas, right? So that would be direct evolution. The third one is when you think of a large organization and multiple Scrum teams, and these teams work with each other. You can look at the interdependencies between teams and help optimize them with the help of the tools in the Kanban method. So that would be sort of scale Scrum. So amplify Scrum, adopt Scrum, and scale Scrum. Those are the three flavors I see. So in terms of the tools that you have in the Kanban method, right, these are the agendas that the Kanban method has. The serviceability agenda, the survivability agenda, and the sustainability agenda, right? The values and the core practices. So this is the application of the Kanban method in Scrum. What does it give you? So one way to apply this is applying it as a lens, right? It gives you perspectives, it gives you understanding, it gives you the tools to then improve. Here's an example. So consider you're having issues. You can look at the lead time and look at the various aspects of where time is being spent, right? And you have, in the Kanban method, these things are common, and these things can be applied even in a Scrum context, right? It gives you intelligence and data to then solve problems. Just some examples, lead time histogram, right? Metrics as a lens, right? So again, these are the three basic flavors. So with that, I'm going to just dive into a couple of those things. First being the Amplify Scrum flavor. So first and foremost, it's really important to recognize that we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Scrum does some things really well. And some of those things are here, right? It does bring the importance of small batch sizes, right? The time box is a natural limiter of work in progress, right? So that's a good thing. collaboration being enabled. So the importance of cadence. So all of these things are good things, right? But typically we see those things when there is a high trust environment, when you have trust at the core, right? So those are important things to recognize. But the other times, Scrum doesn't do some things well. And when do those things occur? So some patterns that we see. When there is not a natural recognition of the unpredictability of work or the complexity of work, right? Or when the product owner role is not working, right? So they don't have an understanding of risk. They don't have an understanding of environmental, market, technical risks, right? So those things, when those things don't occur, you recognize them for what they are and then address them with the tools that you have in Scrumban. So we'll look at a specific example from one of our clients. Here's just a kind of a background of this client. Don't worry about reading that text there. This will be available in the PDFs that will be shared. So forgive me for the text-heavy slides, a couple of them here. But here's a client. What was happening here in a nutshell was that there was basically improvement fatigue. This is a large, their IT team, the IT organization itself was 11,000 strong, right? Huge organization. And they had gone through 3 generations of agile transformation. And there's just, teams were just tired of these large change management programs. So what did we do there? We selected a few teams that we were working with, and this is an instantiation of what? Of the Kanban methods principles, right? So these are, starting with Scrum you already do. That's nothing but starting with what you already do. It's the Kanban methods principles. And starting with that, we started basically a journey with the team where there was a shared ownership, where the leadership was involved. And what we saw starting off was, first of all, this is the same digital M team when I showed you that transformation journey. Their quality was great, but their lead times were really bad. And there was a general recognition that the product owner role was just not working. So that was the context. And in such a situation, we were introduced where there were some Scrum coaches working with the teams. And what I'm going to play for you is a dramatized version of an actual conversation that happened when we entered these teams. Let me see.
Hi, Carol. Can I buy you a coffee? Sure. I'll never turn down a free dose of caffeine. I'm looking forward to the RAD meeting tomorrow. I just connected with the last of the team leads on story slicing, and all 4 are ready to try out this new technique over the next couple of sprints. That's great. Everyone loves RAD's work, but even though their sprint velocities are improving, they aren't completing useful work fast enough. It would be great if they could get useful chunks of functionality into their customers' hands more quickly. I think this new approach will help a lot. Anyway, would love to chat, but I gotta run to my next meeting. See you in the morning. Good morning, everyone. As you know, the mobile app project is very high profile right now, so we're exploring all of our options for speeding up delivery. Management appreciates all your hard work, and I'm optimistic today's discussion will support our objectives. Let me turn things over to Nancy so we can get started. Thanks, Carol. As you know, I've only been filling in as your part-time coach for the past couple of weeks. Before getting started, I'd like to introduce everyone to Sanjay. He'll be your primary coach going forward.
Thanks, Nancy. It's good to be here. I look forward to connecting with everybody over the next several weeks.
Now on to the matter at hand. Over the past couple of sprints, most teams haven't finished all the stories in their sprint backlog. I've looked at the work, and these commitments aren't being completed because the stories are too large. Many can be sliced into smaller, more manageable batches.
Do you have a specific example?
Sure. Let's take a look at story 121 from Javon's team. As a customer, I want to be able to access current balances and transaction history for all of my accounts across all lines of business. There's a lot of functionality contained in this single story. It can easily be broken down into multiple elements. For example, one story to deliver access to all personal deposit accounts, another for all personal loan accounts, and so on. We call this technique vertical slicing.
I understand what you're saying, but there are a number of challenges here. First and foremost, our customers have clearly stated they only care about the combined functionality. They won't use apps with only partial functionality.
Yes, but these discrete slices don't have to be released as they are completed. Your teams and the business will benefit substantially from regularly delivering working chunks of functionality. Just think about how your sprint revenues will become more meaningful.
That's only the tip of the iceberg. To deliver this functionality, we have to undertake some very complex data retrieval and manipulation, complexity driven by the many disparate systems we have inherited from our acquisitions of other banks. The work required to produce working slices of functionality simply can't be completed within a 2-week time period. More importantly, we are not here to improve the quality of our sprint reviews. Slicing stories to meet an artificial, process-based need diverts time and attention from the job at hand. We can't afford the distraction.
Samir, vertical slicing should help these challenges.
Explain to me how vertical slicing will enable us to traverse the data complexities more efficiently.
Javon, when I discussed this technique with you yesterday, you didn't identify any concerns with implementation. You must have had a sense of how you saw vertical slicing working in the context of this story. Can you walk us through that?
Well, I don't think I fully understand your suggestion. After listening to you and Samir, I think he is right. The work necessary to complete even a slice of this functionality can't be completed in 2 weeks.
Samir, I'll take a closer look at this specific story. But the same impediment you're seeing here surely doesn't apply across the board. If your teams make a focused effort to shrink the stories you begin working on, it will greatly improve your overall ability to meet customers' needs.
I disagree. I am intimately familiar with all the work in our backlog. The vast majority of it involves dealing with many different layers. Not only is our current work the bank's first real foray into the mobile arena, but as I said previously, we are tackling this while integrating disparate systems left over from all our acquisitions. We continually discover new complexities with every story. Story slicing is not a problem. In fact, experimenting with yet another new technique will only slow us down and potentially create quality issues. I can't let this happen now.
I don't think I've done a good job of explaining how this will help.
No, I really do understand. We've sliced these stories as narrowly as we can. What you're asking us to do is to slice the work further to fit our sprints. That's just a waste of our time and effort.
You're not even giving me an opportunity to clarify how this works.
You are not listening to what I'm saying about the nature of our work. I'll sit down and talk with you again after you've taken the time to learn more about our work. Until then, we're just wasting time.
Nancy, I think Samir has a valid point here. There may be value in what you're proposing. I'll ask Sanjay to look into it.
So how many folks associate with that sort of a conversation? Yeah? Right? It's pretty common, actually. As I told you, through Scrum we've had exposure to a lot of teams, and it's very, very common. That particular pattern is very, very common. Is there a value for slicing? Absolutely there is, right? Where it can be independently negotiable and valuable and estimate, Bill Wake's acronym, right? Independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and testable. If that can truly happen, sure, there is value, right? And the challenge is we deal with a lot of complexity in many, many contexts. And that's not always, so cutting that through to applying it to any context. And today's many of the Scrum coaches that we've worked with, unfortunately, don't seem to connect those things. And so they tend to apply that sort of, that invest principle in contexts where it's not applicable. And so you can try, but as you can see, it's not always successful. So as we got started with this team, one of the things that there was a serious amount of distrust with the customers and there's with the and the team, the product owner and the team. And part of what was happening was in that transformation journey, what the teams were doing was basically lowering the expectations from a customer standpoint, and then meeting them or manipulating the data to make themselves look good. And so that's a pretty common pattern as well. So as we got started with them, basically, simple evolution, right? Your to-do, doing, done type board to a visual workflow. Nothing too complicated here, right? Just a simple evolution. But what we also did was we started to actually study their data, right? We started to understand what was actually happening, how long things were actually taking. And what we did was a correlation, or we started mapping story points and their lead time. And what we saw was there is some correlation at smaller stories, right? But as the story size increased, the correlation was just poor. And what we also started doing was just looking at how long things were actually taking, and looked at their user stories and how long things took. And what was the clincher was, this was used by the teams to, first of all, truly understand what was happening, and then it became the mechanism, as you'll see, to work with their customers to set expectations. Not just their customers, but also the dependent teams that they were dependent on to get stuff done. And as they got started, from that analysis, from a visual workflow, they started visualizing who they were waiting on and getting that data on the wait times. And also what happened here, you'll see, is the definition of done broke up into this, into multiple stages. So they're not quite gates, but they captured what was the specific value being added at those specific value-adding columns or steps. And so that definitely added value, and it gave them a chance to fail early, right? So that was an important thing. Another thing that they started measuring, and the next slide I'll show you, the process improvement folks in the Kanban, don't jump on me. Let me clarify before you guys jump on me. So this one, the sprint flow efficiency, I know there was a blog post out there and some data that the flow efficiency is 5 to 8% in most teams, and 18 to 35 being a good number to hit. This is the sprint flow efficiency. So within the sprint, the how well things flowed. So it's different from the flow efficiency that you might see in other blog posts. So number one. So in their case, it was a good 63%, which was an interesting number, because one of the things that they were trying to improve was their flow, and because dependencies were a big thing, and so they were trying to capture how much of it was wait time and so on and so forth. So in terms of what they did, the most important thing that happened there was the team started to look at their boards and trust that what was happening on the board, right? They started to use the board as sort of the central information radiator. That's an important thing. The people started referring to the board, and that's an important thing. They mapped their value stream. They implemented WIP limits and all that good stuff. And so in terms of the results, these are not super stunning results if you read David's book and other case studies, but in their context, they were seen as huge successes, right? From a throughput, from a lead time improvements, and from flow efficiency improvements. What was, from a coaching standpoint, for me, what was a clincher was they were actual behavioral changes in the product owner. The way they worked was different. The way the team worked with the dependent teams was different. And that's a really, really important thing, right? Because now what you've done is basically change the engine, right? You've helped people think differently. And now these people can produce these sort of results in context they're part of, right? So that's the real win. That's what the Kanban method should truly bring. That's what Scrumban truly is for you, right? So when you actually are able to get those wins. Just as an example, they used what we call improvement boards, and I'll just give you an example. This is actually an evolution of what they used in their context. This is to help manage the change itself. Let me see if I can, it's not clear there. Okay. So this is similar to what they did, but this is not exactly the same thing. So they basically, retrospectives are a great mechanism for continuous improvement, right? So what they would do is, every retrospective, they would capture what they would work on next, right? And that would go into the opportunities. They would basically, in their case, they would use a similar risk contextualizing mechanism, right? So this is Patrick Sayed's idea, but basically this is crisis and firefighting, ambition, and improvement. So some of them are reactive and proactive, right? These are proactive, these would be reactive, right? And this would be paradigm shifting, and this would be within the paradigm, right? So in terms of the scope of change of what they would work on. And this is the first column it would be in, right? Analyzing risk, working through kind of understanding the problem, right? Sensing, do we need to gather more data? Do we need to analyze the problem, break the problem down? Work on countermeasures, right? Ideas of what can we do about this? Brainstorm ideas, what can we do about this? Break out the problem and brainstorm on the solution. Prioritize what actual improvements you're going to work on and actually implement them. Monitor, journal, document, so on, right over here. And then evaluate for recycle. So you'll see a lot of ideas. I mean, remember the Kanban method. The sixth practice is what? Using scientific modeling and collaboration to continually improve, basically, right? So here, what ideas do you have here? I mean, there's lots of ideas embedded in this. You're using sense making. You're using some A3 stuff. You're seeing the PDCA, Deming's PDCA approach, right? So there's lots of different ideas here. I mean, you don't have to use exactly this, but the basic idea is you're visualizing and managing change. And you're prioritizing change. And that's an important aspect. And that's a very, very direct application of the Kanban method in a Scrum context to amplify Scrum, to improve Scrum, right? So that would be Scrumban. So in terms of what the team did, right? Some other visualizations that the team used. Here's some specific evolutions in terms of time. This is an 8-week. I don't know if the quality is all that good, but you can see buffer columns being introduced, the definition of done broken down. Here's an interesting thing. This is one of the other teams. What this one, as this team progressed, what they did was basically use the Kinevin model as a risk assessment mechanism. So they would basically assess the risk on a card or a feature and use that and work on the greatest risk item first. That was an interesting evolution. It didn't last very long, but it was an evolution that the team, it was an experiment that the team tried out. The other thing that the team did was using Little's Law. So basically using Little's Law to understand how much they can, what sort of expectations that they can set with their product owner. And that was very important as well. So some of the challenges that the team overcame, cargo cult implementations, using systems thinking to help understand what was actually going on, improve their broken commitments with using risk assessments, right? Common stuff in Scrumban teams, or in teams that apply Kanban method in Scrum teams. This is an important one. Typically you have, and I know Jesper yesterday mentioned that the new recommendation is actually 3 to 9. And deciding arbitrarily what the team size should be is also another pitfall typically. Scrumban can help you identify the dependencies, and thereby you can actually identify who should be part of the team. Right, so that's another one that, and of course tactical things like long stand-ups. Your visual board is such an rich information radiator, right? So stand-ups, your planning meetings, all these things should actually take a lot less time. And the data helps usually to make it more reliable as well. So this is a story that I want to tell, is that when co-location becomes such an important thing in Scrum teams, it actually can have counter effects. I know of a client in Boston, the Boston area, where there was a 25-year-old architect. I mean, he's worked with the company for 25 years. Very, very trusted, reliable architect. And the whole co-location, Agile Spaces thing turned out to be the last straw on his back. And he left the company, and it caused a lot of consternation. So evolutionary change is such an important thing. You need to manage change very carefully. And so, and I'll leave you with that.